It's been a couple of years since I last updated my generic extra deck monsters video because there's been a lot of cards that have been released since 2021, I believe is the last time I uploaded it. But I wanted to give you a wide range of extra deck monsters, whether you're playing Labyrinth, whether you're playing Sprite, whether you're playing Castira. I just want to give you a super wide range of cards, whether it's like super poly targets, whether it's just generic Link monsters, generic XYZ monsters, and just all the strong extra deck monsters you can play in your extra deck. Now, all of these cards are very good, and they have their scenarios in which they are good. I just want to give you an idea of what these cards are in the current meta, or generically in general, whether you're playing like maybe even Master Duel, you can look at this. If you're playing like Duel Links, etc., etc., you could take this from all Yu-Gi-Oh ranges and just list them out, how good they are and how bad they are, which is better, which is worse. Are these cards good? Are these cards bad? Like in these certain formats, and then which one is generic, which one is not. So let's start off with, let's just start like in order of what they are ranked here. So I'm just gonna list all the Charmers first because I feel like all the Charmers are kind of the same. They all are very, very strong Link monsters that allow you to Link climb if your opponent has the same type in the graveyard. And I think they're all pretty strong. But I think that for the most part, in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, I think that wind monsters are just not as generic. Fire monsters are just not as generic. Water monsters are just not as generic. Asa, the earth monster, I think is like kind of generic more because a lot of earth monsters or a lot of warrior monsters are earth. And then there's a lot of dark monsters, and if I can find Lina is also really good and generic because it's it's light. And these are the most popular types, and then the rest of them are just not as popular as the others. But yeah, Earth is pretty much in the middle because there's some Earth monsters, and then there's some not Earth monsters. So that is it for the Charmers. I feel like they're all pretty good. Again, all of these cards are very strong in their scenarios. Like if you're going against like Marine Cess, or you're playing Marine Cess yourself, you could be playing this card. If you're playing like Speedroids, you could be playing Wine. If you're playing Salamangreats, you can play the Fire one. If you're playing Adamantium, the Earth, etc., etc. It just depends on what the format is and what the meta is. So yeah, Apollousa is one of the most insane generic Link 4 monsters in the game because it just says negate. It's very good, and it's very strong. It's very hard to get over unless you commit to a battle phase in which you've pretty much said, oh, I'm surviving this turn. So this card is very good. Boral Sword is very good, but it's outclassed by something like Axis Code. Axis Code is probably one of the best Link Force in the game, probably one of the best, extra monsters in the game because it just ends games entirely on its own. Donner, very generic card. We've seen this like in so many different decks outside of Fur Hire. You see it in Castira, you see it in Purely. This card is like very good. It pops a monster in itself. It's just really good for that. IP Masquerena, one of the most insane Link monsters. Once the card came out, it instantly broke the game with Orca Striker. This card is very generic. It lets you Link summon on your opponent's turn, so it's very good. Lyreless Ensemble Robin, it's good, but it's just not good enough. If you're never playing Link 1, or not Link 1s, if you're not playing level 1s, this card just doesn't come up at all. Same thing with Celine. If you're not playing a spellcaster deck with a lot of spells, or like you're not playing a deck with a lot of spells, it just doesn't come up. Moon Maiden, the Link 1, it just doesn't come up if you just don't, have a spellcaster you can link with it. Baron of Floor, one of the most generic extra deck monsters in the game. Allows you to, it's a level 10 synchro. Like, it's super generic. It's very powerful. It has 2 really good effects, even 3 if you really want to count that. And it just says negate. Just like Apollousa, it just says negate, and that's just good enough. But it does have a pop effect, and it also has a effect to summon a monster from the graveyard and then return it back to the extra deck, so you can make it again. So it's really good for that. Beatrice is good, but not quite generic. This card probably should have been banned like a few ban lists ago when Tier Limits was like very insane, but It just didn't get banned. It's been ban worthy for quite a while. I just think it's still not generic enough because level 6 are just not as common. The BLS Link is just outclassed by better monsters. Like, you can make access code to make a big monster. Like, you can make these other, like, generic Link monsters that are just really powerful other than this. And it's also not generic enough as well because it takes a level 7 or higher to make it, you know, can't be targeted, can't be destroyed. So, it's just not that great. Borreload Savage Dragon, it's generically good, but not quite great. But also, it's not generic because you need, like, a Link monster in the graveyard to pretty much get the full value of Borreload Savage Dragon. So this Savage Dragon is really good. Bestial Dispatter, this card is very, very insane, but it's not quite great. And it also gets outclassed by something like Baron the Floor, but it has a different application. You could also summon this alongside with Baron the Floor in many different decks. So Dispatter is very, very strong. Chaos Angel, this card has been a powerhouse since it came out. It's been very good in Labyrinth. It's been very, very good in Dragon Link. And it's good in any light or dark deck. It's just very, very strong. Just to remove a card from the field as a level 10 Synchro. These level 10 Synchros are getting very powerful these days. Cherubini is good, but not relevant enough. Yeah, it's not relevant. Let's put it here. Not relevant enough. Yeah. Cherubini could be insane. It's a ban-worthy card, but it's just not generic enough. It's just not a generic card like that. And I feel like not many decks can, like, utilize this to the fullest extent. You only see it in, like, BA, and then, like, Phantom Knights, and then other, like, level 3 spam decks. But, like, besides that, you don't see it. Like, it's non-existent in this format. But it's a very, very insane card. Being able to send a level 3 from your deck as cost. It is very good. And it's very generic. Cross Jeep is another very good card, but it's just not relevant enough. Like, the fusion effect is really good. The ritual effect is decent. The other effects are, you know, they're whatever. But, like, the fusion effect is what a lot of people abuse with this card, and it's very, very insane as a Link too. I think it's very good. It's just not relevant enough. There's not enough a lot of decks utilizing this except like Madium. Madium is like the only deck that just doesn't or utilize this card in the current format. Zeus is one of the best cards in the game. Zeus is crazy. It's powerful. Probably should be banned. It's limited in the OCG. Being able to stack this on top of any XYZ that battled that turn, and then being able to wipe your opponent's field not once per turn, so you could just keep wiping and wiping and wiping your opponent's field. So it's really good. Berserker of the Tenyi, a level 8 Synchro. It's not good enough. It's not quite great. There's other level 8 Synchros that are like very powerful. I can't think of an example, but there's a lot of level 8 Synchros. But it's just not that. It's still a good card. It's still a good card. Exciton Knight, I would put this in this category, but I think this card is like insane. Evil Storm Exciton Knight, ever since this card got like unbanned, people are like, this card's like whatever. But now, people are just abusing this card. You've seen this in tier format. People are using this to wipe boards, like against like Flu or whatever. And this card's just insane. It's basically Baby Zeus. It's Baby Zeus. It used to be the most insane card. Again, this card used to be banned. It's just really, really strong. Garura is a very good card. It's just not generic enough. It's just not generic enough, but it's really good in what decks you could play. Like Tier Limit, this card was insane. It's an insane Super Poly target. Actually, because of Super Poly, it might be insanely generic and great. I would say. But you could also use it as a punishment target. Yeah, this card's insanely great. Yeah, this card is insanely good. It just has multiple uses, and I like that about cards. Generator Transverser. This card is just outclassed by other monsters. Like, if you really want to get rid of a monster, like, it's only really used by, like, really gimmicky FTKs. But besides that, it's just, like, why would you make this over, like, Cerberus or Phoenix or, like, you know, like, any of these cards that, like, move opponent's monsters off the field? Like, why would you use this card? Why won't you go on a Zeus? Why don't you go on a Titan Knight? Like, you just make better monsters. You know, the Transverse is only good for like gimmicky scenarios in which your opponent plays into it, or you like give your opponent monster and it now points to Geonosis transverse. It's just not that great. Sargass is really good, but not quite great. It's not even that generic because you're restricted to the type of deck you're playing, right? Sargass, if you don't know, it can add I believe, a Springans card or a Therion card. So the Therions, they only really cover plant decks, machine decks, aqua decks, warrior decks, and then there's like a few others like reptiles and other like obscure types. But for the most part, the two best ones are the plant one and the machine one. And plants and machines, they're not as popular as like warriors and spellcasters and fiends. Like, they're not as popular as those, but this one is just, this card is like really good. It's really, really good, but it's just not generic enough. Gravity Controller, really good card. It's just not relevant enough. Like, we've seen this in Shaddoll format to get the Shaddoll Construct off the board, the App Clone off the board. You've seen in BA, you get rid of Dante off the board so you can trigger your effects. So it's a really good card. It's not relevant enough. I think it's still really good though. Herald of Arclight, this card is very good, but it's not quite generic enough. It's kind of hard to get like a level 1 tuner and a level 3 non-tuner to make Herald of Arclight. But this card is very insane. Don't get me wrong. This card has multiple uses. It's good in ritual decks. It's good in decks that can make it. It's a negate, and it's also a floodgate. So it's also good for that. And it also is a level 4. You can, go into like, I don't know, Exciter or Tornado Dragon or, number 60 Dugaris. Like, you can just make this, and it's just really, really powerful. Fuko is really good, but it's just not generic enough. It's only good in level 1 decks, and it's also only good for making Zeus or just sitting on it to make sure you just don't die that turn. So that is like the only uses for that. Nightmare monsters are insane. Griffin, we've seen a really huge rise in this card in the past couple of months. We've seen it in tier format. We see it now in Evil Twins. This card is very, very powerful for setting, Eradicator, Summon Limit. It's also just really good for being like a floodgate in general. It's just a really powerful link for a monster. Nightmare Cerberus is probably the worst one of the bunch, but it's still really powerful. It's, destroys a special summon monster in the main monster zone, which is like really, really powerful. Phoenix, really good, destroys back row. Nightmare Unicorn, like all of these nightmares are super insane. They have been really good ever since their release, and I don't see them ever leaving the realm of insanely generic and great. Lingaribo is really good, but it's not generic enough. It's a very powerful card in any Cyber's deck, besides like maybe a Marine Cess because they lock you in the waters. But Lingaribo is still really powerful. It's really good in stuff like Bathmech, Salamangreat, etc., etc. Name all the, Code Talkers, all these different Cyber's decks. It's really powerful, negates a trap, and it also just links off different cards. So you can, go into like Parallel Exceed, summon it, use the effect, go into rank 4. Really, really powerful. Link Spider, it's not relevant right now, but it's a very, very powerful card in which, if you expect Nibiru, this could be really good for, getting rid of the token and then summon another monster, maybe go to the Link 2 or something like that. This card is really powerful in the scenarios that it's good in. It's good in like normal monster if you're playing, I don't know, World Chalice to get the normal monster, normal summon or special summon the normal monster, go into Link Spider, special summon a normal monster for your hand, go into a Link 2 or something like that. So it's really good for that. Besides that, it's just not generic enough. Link Karibo, this card is very generic. Ever since it came out, it got, Level Eater banned, it got like a different bunch of cards banned. It was really good in Spiral. It's just a generically powerful, insane card. Mech Knight Avermax, this card is very, very good. I think it's just not good enough. I think there's better Link 4s like Apollosa, Access Code, Griffin. They're just way better, and they have a lot more uses. Avermax is more for like cheese. Like, you just can't out this card sometimes because it can't be destroyed, can't be targeted, with stuff like IP Masquerena and stuff like that. And it also gains attack when it's attacked, so it's really hard to out. But besides that, it's just a gimmicky card. Mirror Jade is a really powerful card, but it's just not generic enough. You could, play it with Branded Fusion. You could summon it with Fusion decks, with Albaz and stuff like that. So it's a very powerful card. It's an insane card. Maybe even ban worthy one day, but it's just not generic enough. It is locked into the Fallen of Albaz archetype, so it is just not generic enough. But it's very, very insane. This card is broken. Muckraker, this card is very good, but not quite great. It's a generic Link 2. It summons a Fiend monster from your graveyard by discarding one card. It's a really good card, and it also protects your cards from being destroyed by Battle of Card Effect, I believe. It's just really good for that. So it's a really good card. You see it in Labyrinth, you see it in Dark World, so it's a really good card. Mud Dragon is really good, but it's just not generic enough. You only really see this in fusion decks. Like, I guess it's very generic just because of Super Poly. Both of these cards are like really, really generic, and they're really good when they come up, and they're insane because Mud Dragon is not only just like a fusion monster you can use for Super Poly. It's also stops your opponent from targeting your cards on the field. So it's just really good for that. And it's also a level 4. You can go into Redoer, Tornado Dragon, Abyss Dweller, etc., etc. It's just a really good card. And it's very generic. Mannequin Cat. This card, it's not quite generic, but it's really good. But I guess because Sprite is in the format, it is very generic. You have Runic in the format, so, another level 2 can make Mannequin Cat. So this card is very, very generic and good, but I would say that it's probably not generic enough. But it's still a really insane card. Special summons a monster from the deck, the same type or attribute. Really insane card. Special summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard onto their field to get, hurt Kashtira. This card is just very insane. It's really good. Baguska, insanely powerful and generic card. We saw a bit of a drop in usage of Baguska when Link Monsters came out, but as of recently, since the new Master Rule 5 rule came out, this card has been very, very insane. It was meta defining in the tier format against stuff like Flu, Sword Soul, all these different decks that really can't make Link Monsters that much. So it's really good. It's really insane. Number 60, Dugares. This card is insanely powerful and generic. Any level 4 deck, which is like most decks in the game, can make this. Draw 2 cards, special number card from graveyard, double the attack. It is insane. This card could probably be banned one day. So this card is very good. Utopic Draco Future. This card is very, very powerful. I wouldn't say it's not quite great. I would say it's only really good in decks where you don't have to go out your way to make it. Stuff like Lyralus. Lyralus doesn't have to go out of their way to make this card because they just make Recital Starling. They make 2 Recital Starlings in their regular combo, and they're like, oh, I have 2 level 1 XYZs. I can just go into Utopic Draco Future. But in stuff like Kashtira or any other XYZ deck, you're just forcing yourself to make this card, and it's just not that great. But it is very powerful. It has 2 powerful effects. Can't be destroyed by Battle Over Card Effect. Can steal a monster and negate its effects. It's a really good card. Psychic and Punisher. This card is not quite generic, but this card is insane. This card can be a powerhouse. This card can get to 12 million attack, and it can be unaffected by your opponent's card effects or unaffected by other card effects. This card is very, very insane. It can banish a card from both players' field. This card is very insane, but it is a level 11 synchro, which could kind of make it less generic, but it's still a very insane card in stuff like Punk and Gold Pride, etc., etc. You name all the decks that pay life points. This card is just very, very insane. Cyflame Lord Omega, very, very powerful card and extremely generic. It's a level 8 synchro, one of the best level 8 synchros in the game. This card is still limited because you can do Omega loops over and over and over again. You've seen it with Bisto Dispatter and Super Heavy Samurai's last format. This card was very, very good. But I would say it's less generic than something I I don't know. I can't really think. Excel, like Excel into Baron was way more popular than something like Omega, but it is still a very, very generic and great card in general. Whether you're playing Master Duel or you're playing stuff like, this format, TCG. Ravenous Crocosaur. This card is very good, but it's just not generic enough. It's really hard to make this. I've only seen this played in like Virtual World, water decks like Mermail. It's just not generic enough. But when you can summon this card, it is very, very powerful. It draw cards up to the number of non-tuners, I believe, and it also discards 2 cards from your hand and then pop a card on the field. It's very, very good. It's just 2 really good effects, and it's a synchro monster, but it is a level 9 synchro, which is kind of harder than making like a level 10 like Baron the Floor or Chaos Angel. Almirage is an insanely generic, powerful card. Normal summon any monster with 1,000 or less attack. Alistair, Plague Spreader, you name it. All these cards are just really good. You can just summon them, link them off, get their effects. Really, really powerful. Or, Alistair, link it off, go into, Secure Gardener, and then go Invocation. There you go. You have a light monster. You have a fire monster in your graveyard for Purgatrio. It has very, very good applications, even outside of the Salamangreat archetype that it is in. Saryuja Scoldred is outclassed by other Link 4s. You have stuff like Apollousa. That's just a huge difference because once Apollousa came out and Nibiru the Primal Being, Saryuja was very outclassed. It's very risky to go a Saryuja, but it still has applications. It was used last format in Super Heavy Samurais to summon stuff like Spell Canceller, to summon all these, Jinzo, all these generically powerful tribute monsters or just monsters that just say, you cannot activate this card. You cannot use this card. So it's just very good for that. But I would say, for the most part, it's outclassed with stuff like Apollousa and Nightmare Griffin. Oh, a new card. From the new Battle of Legend Monstrous Revenge, we have Sky Striker Azalea. This card is very, very powerful. Pops a spell trap card. I believe it's a Link 2. I think it takes a light and dark monster and/or dark monster. Really good card. We've seen it in the OCG used in stuff like Purely. I think it's good, but not quite great. It's still not as generic as these other cards, but I think it's a very good card. I think it's really, really strong. I think it's very powerful and will be used in the near future for quite a while. Slacker Magician, this card is not generic, but it's very good in stuff like Purely. It's good in stuff like Lyralus. It's just really good in general for, level 1. It's just the level 1 monsters that you use to go into Zeus, which is really, really powerful. It's just used in this format now because we have stuff like Book of Moon and Enemy Controller that just target cards. So you could just say, okay, I'm going to just negate it, which is very powerful. Splash Mage, really good, but not quite generic. It's only used in Cyber's decks. It can summon a Cyber's monster from your graveyard, which is very powerful. And then you can link climb and stuff like Transcode, or if you're playing Marine sets, you can go into Marble Rock. So it's very good for that. Chungyung, this card is very good. This card is a really, really powerful level 10 synchro, but it's just not good enough. It is the same thing as this pattern. It's a really good card, but I think Baron the Floor just tops it all, as well as Chaos Angel. Both of these cards are just way more powerful than stuff like Chungyung and Bestial Dispatter, so they're just really good for that. Thousand Eyes Restrict, this card used to be very popular when Instant Fusion was at 3, but this card is just outclassed. It's just not as great as it used to be. Let's go to another card that's similar, and Relinquish Anima. This card is very good, but it's just not generic enough. It only works level 1s, which is, Purely, Lyralus, all these level 1 decks. It's really good, and if they play into the Anima zone, you can just say, oops, take it. But I think it's still pretty good. I think it's like a Link Kuriboh. I guess it's like a Link Kuriboh, but it is really good. I think I would put it in here, actually. I think it's generically good and great. But I think the only thing that's, like, making it a little bit worse than something like Link Kuriboh or Almirage is that it points up instead of down, which is, it works the way it works because it has that effect. But it's really good. Still has monsters that it points to, and, it could be good. It's still a really powerful Link 1. Again, link any Link 1, use its effect, Glow Bulb, Spiral, Quick Fix, etc., etc. These cards are really good. Redoer, really, really insane rank 4. This card was a TCG exclusive back in 2019, I believe, or 2018. I think it was 2019 in Savage Strike. This card is very insane. You've seen it in Tier Limit format. We see it in Lunalight format. Like, both of these like decks use this card to its fullest potential, being able to detach for an effect to trigger stuff like Sharon or trigger Yellow Martin that is on attached to his monster. So it's really good for that, and it also has a really good effect in either balancing a card. You have the effect of drawing a card, or even removing itself from the field, so you can dodge stuff like, you know, Raigeki or Dark Hole or whatever, enemy controller, etc. You name it. This card just dodges everything. Totally awesome. Insanely good card. It's very broken, but it's not relevant enough. It used to be relevant in Sprite when we had Ronin Totem, but now if we don't have Ronin Totem, it's just not good enough. It's just not generic enough. You see it in stuff like Mermail. You see it in stuff like Marine Cess. It's just not generic enough. Otherwise, this card would be here. This card would probably be ban worthy if it was like a rank 4 XYZ or like a link 2. This card would be insane. This card would be broken, but it's a level 2, you know, water monster that can only use level 2 aqua monsters to make it. So it's just not generic enough. The topologic monsters, Bomber Dragon is outclassed. Zerboris is just, it's not relevant enough. These cards, they have their applications. Like, people used to use this in tier format or Orcus format. Zerboris is really good with Snow. Fairy Tail Snow was like really good with this card. It's still really good. Stuff like Gizmek. You can, you know, go into this and then summon Gizmek to the zone that card this card points to, and then, you know, banish all cards on the field or blow up all monsters on the field in the main monster zone. So this card can be really good, but it can be really good, but it's just not generic enough, or it's just not relevant enough, or it gets outclassed by other cards like, you know, again, Apollousa or Griffin. Tornado Dragon, it's good, but it's not relevant enough. Like, we used to see this with artifact cards like Artifact Scythe in, you know, many different decks, but it's just not generic enough. It also gets outclassed by stuff like Nightmare Phoenix. Like, if you're just gonna make, you know, take 2 monsters on the field and go into like a generic Link monster, probably go into Phoenix more times than you make Tornado Dragon, unless you're playing stuff like artifacts. Psyframe, Lord Lambda. This card is just not relevant enough. It's just not relevant anymore because Psyframe Gear Gamma is now at 1, but I will say, this card searches out Psyframe Gear Gamma, which is pretty good, but you also have to play Driver, which is bad. So you have to play 1 brick and then, you know, a really powerful card, but like, it's just not really good enough. It's not like Brilliant Fusion where you're getting like tons of value. So I just don't think it's great right now. Castira Arisehart. Now this is a weird card. It's in a weird position. It's not generic enough, but it's insanely generic if you consider that Fenrir is used in every single deck. I will say it's not generic enough, but still really powerful in the format, because hypothetically every deck can play Fenrir, and for the most part you could probably get your opponent to trigger Shangri-La so you can summon out a Arisehart. Or if you could play like a Castira engine in your deck. You could play a Castira engine, and you could just get 3 level 7s on the field and make a Arisehart. So it's just really good for that. And then Guardian Chimera, really good. It's only really good in like decks that can use Poly. Like, we see it in Branded, we've seen it in Fluffles, we see it in, you know, Lunalights. It's good in those decks, but not many decks are playing Polymerization and Edge Jump Chain and all these other crazy cards. So it's really good. It's really powerful in the decks that it could, you know, use it, or what. It's really good in the decks that can use it, but it's still just not generic enough. Isolde is a broken card. It's the same thing as Cherubini. Same thing. Really insanely generic, but just not relevant enough. Once we get another warrior deck like Goki, which we are with the new set, Duelist Nexus, and the Infernoble archetype that's getting support, this card could be insane. But Warrior monsters are just not as great as they used to be back in 2018. They used to be insanely broken, insanely powerful. But now in 2023, it's just not insane. It's not generic enough. And it's just not relevant enough. Assemble Robin, or Assembled Lyrlust. This card is pretty good, just not generic enough. Again, it's another level 1 XYZ. It's only really used for Zeus. Yeah, it's just really good. Zombie Vampire. This card is really good, but it's just not relevant enough. We've seen this really used in stuff like tier limits and just other like decks like Punk, you know, piles with, you know, Thunder Dragons and, you know, all these graveyard centric decks. This card is really powerful. It's even decent in, you know, vampires if you can make it, but this card is insane. It's really good in stuff like tier limits to, you know, trigger all their effects. It's just not relevant enough. Like Chaos Ruler, after the card got banned, this card just dropped significantly in popularity. And, you know, tiers being out of the format, Castira being relevant, this card just not really that good. Dragoon is another card that's generically powerful, but not relevant enough. You can see this in stuff like Branded, or you could play it in stuff like, I would say it's more like not generic enough, but still good. Yeah, I would say it's in this category. It's really good in stuff like Branded, where you can like fusion and substitute the material for Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, and it just works in other fusion decks or like, you know, decks in general that can use Red Eyes Fusion. But it's just not generic enough, not powerful enough. You only really see this in Branded, maybe Guru, maybe Labyrinth. But besides that, it's just not that generic. Underworld Goddess, this card is insane. Being able to link your opponent's monsters into a very powerful 3k attack monster that can not be removed off the field except by targeting it. And it also negates a summon from the graveyard, whether it's your opponent or your own effects if you want to do that. But it is really powerful, really good. Link 5, works at IP Masquerade on your opponent's turn. It's just really good. It's really good for Island Towers monsters, like the Attic Nister, or, you know, just other really strong Towers monsters. Atlantis, this card is insanely powerful, but it's just not relevant enough right now. This card can be really insane in like decks that can just summon, you know, summon, banish, summon, banish, summon, banish, summon, use this effect, summon, banish. Like, this card can be really insane, and it also has a second effect that in the battle phase, it can destroy cards on the field up to the number of co-link monsters on the field. So this card can be really, really insane as a Link 4, but it's just not relevant enough. It's just not relevant enough, but it will have its time to shine, and maybe it would be broken. Maybe it would be banned one day. Naturia Beast, not generic enough, really powerful, negate spells, level 5 synchro, really good. Fortune Tune, this card is really good. Level 2 XYZ monster, can stop itself being destroyed, and just goes into Zeus, which is very powerful. Abyss Dweller, really insane card. It's just not relevant right now, which would make it not quite great. But when it's great, it's insane. You seen it in Lunalight format. You've seen it in Telement format. You've seen it, you know, when Mermos is relevant. It's been relevant for years and years and years. It's just not really good in some formats. Like right now, Abyss Dweller is terrible. What are you gonna Abyss Dweller? Castira? They're gonna laugh at you. But in other formats, like tier format, like a month or two or whatever, how many months ago, or if you're playing Master Duel, this card's insanely generic and great. But in terms of the format right now, it's just not great. But I would say, in general, Abyss Dweller is generically insane and powerful. Sky Cavalry, another level 2 XYZ monster that you can climb up into Zeus, can't be destroyed by battle. Really good card. Borlo Dragon, it's just outclassed by other Link 4s. Again, Appaloosa, Boar Sword, and all these other cards. It's still good, but it just get outclassed. Millennium Master Strict, it's good, but not relevant enough. Again, Instant Fusion went to 1, which made this card a lot less generic. But you did see it in stuff like Tier Limits, because you can substitute 4 different monsters and then go into this. Really powerful. Trishbana, really good. Banishes cards. Same thing with the Zero Boros, but it's just not it's just not as good as like other Link, you know, threes. You could go on a Unicorn and just do pretty much the same, or Zero Boros, or just like access code. Like there's just better ways to get rid of your opponent's back row. But it could be relevant one day. It could be relevant one day, which fair enough. But I think there's other better cards. Draco's Tabelia, another good card, just not generic enough. It's only used in fusion decks, so you get Entailment. Rusty Bardish. This card is crazy, but it's not relevant enough. There's not a lot of dark decks in the format right now. But when this card is relevant, and you can afford to play the bricks like the PK monsters, this card could be insane. It was banned like a couple of years ago, but it's not relevant right now. Abomination, really good Link 4, kind of outclassed in general, but you see it in stuff like Runic because it can pop a card on your opponent's turn. So this card can be really good. It's just not quite great as these other cards, and it also gets outclassed by like other Link 4s like Apollos and Nightmare Griffin again. And then Sprite Sprin. This card is generically great and powerful. Sends any level 2 from your deck to the graveyard. And yeah, there's Merly, there's Sprite cards like Nimble, Angler, you could send like a Sprite Blue or Jet. There's other different targets you should send as well, which is really good. It's just a generically powerful card. So, that is it, guys. This has been a mouthful. This has been 80 plus cards. And I think all of these cards have their usage. Even the cards that are outclassed by better monsters, these cards are really powerful, really generic, really insane. And yeah, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think, and peace.